Hello there. Again. This seems kind of familiar, doesn't it? That's because you're still staring at the same blank issue of Thor written by, you guessed it, Donny Cates. Here's the deal. After I made my first video on this topic, I quickly realized that comic book covers, specifically variants, get even weirder. And I still have a lot to talk about and a lot of questions. So naturally, I went on a little journey, making sure to take this Thor comic with me. Where to, you might ask? Well, to the place where I first bought this issue, my local comic book shop, A Place in Space. And I had the exciting opportunity to conduct a casual interview.
I want to start off with some more generalized questions about just the logistics of being in the industry.
Okay.
So the first thing I wanted to ask is...
Pause. Before we continue, let me give you a brief history of A Place in Space. It started out in 2000 as a small comic book and collectible shop, one of the very few in Croydon being a borough in London. It faced a lot of financial struggles over the years as it remained a sort of small place for enthusiasts. It was affected in 2011 by the London riots, nearly being burned down. More recently, it was affected by the pandemic, like a lot of small businesses. It found success online through means such as its eBay store, and in September 2020, it moved around the corner to a bigger and better location, which was quite the deserving upscale. From this short highlight reel of sorts, we can see that it is incredibly hard to run a homegrown comic shop, like any small business. It requires perseverance and dedication, a passion for the medium, and a willingness to stick to it despite the ups and downs of the market.
Do you think it's nowadays, whether it's easier or harder to run like a brick and mortar comic book shop, especially considering like we're in a post-pandemic sort of setting?
Oh man, harder for sure. I'll be completely honest. I only think the reason we're still here, and the reason why we've had a lot of experience, and I've been in the industry for 16 years and the company has been here for 22, so we've had a lot of experience. I've seen a lot of shops come and go within the last couple of years who've just migrated to like an online presence only because the world of commerce is now online. That's just kind of the way the world has gone. We are still here and we are doing well, but only because we have not quit. There have been some horrific years where it's just you're on the margin. And then we just kind of doggedly stuck at it until we're here again now. So now I'd say, and again, I can only speak for us here, we're experiencing a little bit more business and growth after the pandemic. Those pandemic years were ropey.
Tough, yeah.
If we take a look at the industry data for North America by Comicron, we can see that comics have seen a general trend upwards in terms of sales, with 2021 being an especially profitable year. However, it isn't exactly your sunshine, lollipops and rainbows. If we look at the sales by format, we can see that the $2 billion in sales is primarily due to graphic novels, a large part of which is Japanese manga. The sales of physical periodical comics have still been doing pretty well, but they are gradually having to face up to the rising popularity of other formats such as manga and digital comics. It would be quite unrealistic to say that the comics industry is dying. More appropriately, the traditional channels for comics distribution is undergoing a lot of changes, which makes the future of periodical comics filled with uncertainty. And a lot of the time, smaller comic shops are left to figure things out in the face of this uncertainty.
How do you foresee the future of the industry? Like, for example, do you think there'll be like a sort of complete migration towards digital comics as physical books kind of start to die out?
So I am 34 years old. When I first got into it at 16, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, it was weird, man, because comics were still in like this issue's coming out, the next issue's coming out next month, the next issue's coming out the month after that. These days, the market moves on a dime. It moves like by the hour. And a completely different way for comics are now moving and are hot, so to speak. So in terms of longevity of the market, it's so tough. I mean, we kind of stick to what we've always done. I think you know the store quite well personally, but we specialise in back issues and offering the best possible range we can for our current customers. So if someone wants to come in and buy anything out this week, we try and offer it. That's just what we do. So where we are now, where it's going, it's so hard, dude, because 99% of this store exists off our standing order basis. But comics are a form of retail and enjoyment which require dedication. It's very hard just to buy one comic once and get a complete story. I think to loop back to your original question, I will try and make sure that the future of the business and the future of the sales that come from just us are geared towards customers who know what they can expect out of us.
Could you foresee this shop existing in like 10, 20 years?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I could, simply because of what we offer. I've got stuff on the walls going back to the 40s. I think there's always going to be a market for the older stuff. In terms of the new stuff, very good question. I'd really love to say there would still be a market for newly printed books in 10 years. And I think the best way to answer that question is to dial back 10 years. So 10 years ago, there was hysteria that the digital medium was going to kill off comics forever.
Right, yeah.
I was worried about it 10 years ago, and I look at it now and it's stronger than ever. On that assumption, I think it's fair to say that it's got a hell of a good chance. With enough cultivation and enough people pushing it, fans, vendors, sellers, retailers, wholesalers, no matter what, as long as everyone's in it for the greater good, i.e. having fun, reading a bit, making an occasional buck or two,
right,
you're fine.
Right.
I hope so.
This is the point where I began to ask about variant covers in specific, and the role that they play in shaping the landscape of the modern comics industry. As an example, I brought up the Thor cover and also the first issue of Moon Knight, which was published in 2021 with 51 different variant covers.
Variant covers, right?
Ooh, boy, yeah.
So I've bought a few comics. This is a blank cover of Thor, right? In my opinion, it's kind of gimmicky, right? And in recent years, Marvel, DC, all the publishers have started to push out more and more of these variant covers. For example, if you think back to last year, first issue of Moon Knight was released with, as far as I can count, like 51 different covers.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that there is a problem with variant covers? Do you think that there's probably an oversaturation?
Massively.
Okay, could you explain that bit?
Okay, super quickly here. If you think back to the seminal characters that we have now, your Hulks and your Thors and your Batmans and your whatnot, these pillars of the comic book world, they were all built, established, and created on runs of longevity. For hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of issues, and I mean that literally, I'm not even shitting, like for hundreds of issues, those characters existed by being published without a single variant cover, and fans just cared about the story.
Exactly.
So variants are a very, very new entity, and if you take comics as being roughly 85 years old, variants have only really been a fucker for the last 20. And they serve a good purpose, and they're also very hard. Like, for example, we as a company sell an enormous amount of variants. Great for business, sure. On the other hand, we constantly have to run around after those variants. One variant can sell because it's deemed to be hot.
Right, yeah.
And the very next variant, by the same artist, can be dead.
Right.
So say if Artgerm's done an amazing variant for one cover, everyone wants it. We might sell 100 copies of that. So we might slash our orders for the second copy and assume that justifiably we might sell 85 covers for the next variant he does. And we've ended up selling 20. So instantly, you've lost all profit on the second book and you've lost your profit on the first book. And that sounds quite harsh. But that's unfortunately what a variant can do. When they all go well, they're very, very good because essentially, on one hand, you're offering the consumer a great range of choice. Who doesn't want choice?
Right, yeah.
But at the same time, you're getting to the point where you've got too much choice. So if you launch Moon Knight with 4 covers, great, fun. You probably find people going, you know what, I have all 4 covers. Dropping Moon Knight to 51 covers, and you're like, the best way I can explain it is this. We have some extremely wealthy clients on the books here. At one point, were Marvel completists. By which I mean that if there was a book coming out and it was published by Marvel,
they get everything.
They wanted it. They wanted every cover. They wanted every cover, every variant, just because they wanted what they deemed to be as a complete Marvel library. And when I say clients, I'm talking top surgeons, very, very, high earners. And these people kept up with the industry for years. And all of a sudden, within the last 10 years, they tell me now they can afford a fraction of what Marvel put out and a fraction of what they used to buy. That tells you that their biggest, most wildly exaggerated buys ever are currently being priced out of the market. And if we dial that all the way down to, let's say, first time buyer, a young lady might be 14, wanting to get into right now Miss Marvel, massive on TV, a new series drops. And suddenly she's like, oh, maybe she just wants the first issue. Wicked. Suddenly she's feeling a little bit overwhelmed because she might type in Miss Marvel #1 onto eBay and it's just too much. And she's like, is there a right one? Is there a wrong one? You're now finding that buyers are left feeling like they don't know what they want because there's too much.
Okay.
And that's quite harmful.
Right.
I mean, that's just for the buyer. Stocking it is a logistical nightmare.
Tom covers some really interesting perspectives here. Variants are essentially made to feed into the fetishization of exclusivity by appealing to collectors and completionists. But that reaches a point where even hardcore collectors are stunned by the sheer volume of variants. There is also a case to be made that variants impact new readers as well, being quite an intimidating barrier due to the sheer volume of options. This isn't to say that giving consumers more choice is a bad thing, more so that publishers in recent years have taken things to an illogical extreme. Comics operate on a system of devotion. Readers need to buy one issue after another in order to get the full story. And the existence of so many variants may indicate that comics being sold for their story alone is just not cutting it in today's era. Amidst the struggle to attract newer readers that will become long-term customers, the industry is resorting to pumping out variants in order to keep these numbers up. The question now is, how long can this keep on going?
So a lot of the problem that I have with variant covers is with incentive variants, because
Yes.
I feel like they force retailers to order lots of copies of another book, even if they know there's not that much demand for that book,
Yep.
just so they can get like a rare variant.
Yep.
Do you think that's sort of unhealthy? Is that a bad practice? Is that sustainable practice?
No, it really depends on how you run it. For us, it works really, really well. We have a very established client base, which we've grown over 2+ decades, who come to us specifically for those variants. So speaking purely for ourselves, they're very beneficial. They can actually really help us through some lower sales periods.
Right.
You know, if you sell one variant for over £100, that can completely offset a lower selling title. Bear in mind, when I say a lower selling title, you're dealing with weeks now where there are over 300 titles out. 300 titles, then you've got multiple covers, then you've got multiple tiers. You can often have a single week of comics where you've got over 1,000 individual items shipping, and you've got to try and work out which ones go for which money and which ones are worth money. And then, of course, your customers got to try and keep up with that. Money's a very, very finite thing right now. People aren't loaded.
Right.
You know, it's important to try and offer range, but also give people a good service and not just whack them over the head with a money hammer. And like what Marvel are publishing right now is way too much. And I think for the smaller shops, or at least different shops, way too much. It's always important to analyse the American market, because obviously I'm speaking to you from here in the UK, very different. When the American retailers are screaming that it's too much, it's just way too much. But what you're also finding, that ratios are one thing, but now you're getting people doing exclusive variants, which I think is the main problem.
To interject here, exclusive variants, also known as store exclusive variants, are when individual comic stores can pay the publisher like Marvel and DC to make a variant cover specifically for them, which then they alone can sell as exclusive.
The problem you've got is that a lot of people are now publishing exclusive variants, which allow them to order more ratios as well. And of course, no one's not bound to buy into it. No one has to buy these things.
Right.
But you're also dealing with a form of product which has always encouraged and promotes a fierce form of loyalty. And you see a lot of people getting very unhappy and depressed when they can't buy everything. I'm never one to tell anyone how they should spend their money. All I will say is that the sheer amount of covers is alarming as hell.
Ultimately, the biggest problem that the comic book industry is facing is the idea of longevity amidst rapid change. It has been 84 years since the release of Action Comics issue 1, and a lot has changed since then. Speculation, market crashes, new formats, an influx of variants. Can the industry survive another 84 years? If so, I really do think that the problem of variants has to be addressed. I think Tom summarised it best when he said,
If, gun to the head moment, if I had my way and I could control the industry, I'd like to see less covers produced, for sure. I mean, I'm not saying dial it all the way back to 1 or 2, less would certainly be more helpful.
In my last video on this topic, I said that the comic book industry always judges a book by its cover. This may be the case, but that doesn't mean that we, as readers and as fans, should have to do the same. Thanks for watching.